Today's sessions form part of a Pan-African initiative that aims to unite Africa's conservation community in the fight against invasive plants. Supported by the JRS Biodiversity Foundation and led by Share Screen Africa and Leadership for Conservation in Africa, the program will share expertise, build skills, and turn biodiversity data into practical action to manage invasive plants. Because we are going to be talking about two of the major spots in all of conservation. If you master the skills to look at these blind spots and do something about it, you will be noticed. The first blind spot is invasive alien plants, or IAP. It always trips me up. So if you see that IAP, it's for invasive alien plants. Imagine a monster with thousands of offspring, the ability to hitchhike far beyond its natural home, and insatiable appetite for space, water, sunlight, and resources. Given enough time, it can conquer entire landscapes. That's an invasive alien plant. The second blind spot is planning. The overwhelming cause of plans failing is not planning. Students, you cannot be a leader or manager without learning planning skills. Nobody is born with it, but anybody can learn it and master it. If you do, it will be a game changer in your career. This is why we bring you leading experts this afternoon in the subject. The first two speakers are going to look at the bigger picture of planning in conservation. And then we are going to zoom into the unique planning process for invasive plant control. So our first speaker this afternoon will be Peter Mathenge. He is the ideal person to open the session. He is academically trained in management, but he works in conservation and runs a very successful program in controlling Opuntia stricta. In fact, if you Google Kenya and Opuntia stricta, the Laikipia Wildlife Forum will pop up all over the show. He is always in the field, but somehow he finds time to plan thoroughly. So, Peter, if you can please get us excited about the process of planning. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Johan. And good afternoon to all the students who are joining us today. My name is Peter Mathenge, and I work with Laikipia Wildlife Forum as the program officer. We are based in Nanyuki, Kenya, and basically what we do, we are membership-based conservation organization that supports, facilitates, and coordinates issues of natural resource management within the greater Laikipia landscape. Our work cuts across 6 main thematic areas, and that is issues of land management. We also handle issues of water, because Laikipia is a water scarce county. We also deal with issues of land use, and we also deal with issues of tourism, as well as issues of forest and landscape restoration. Today, I'll be presenting to you the aspects of management in a conservation perspective. Yeah, thank you so much. Basically, through my introduction, what I mentioned to you is that we want to discuss about what management is, and in the context of lessons learned by Laikipia Wildlife Forum. I'll start by saying that management basically forms the foundation of any successful conservation initiative. And we all know very well that management basically is a process. You have to think about the planning, you have to think about the organization of the work you are doing, taking lead, as well as controlling the resources to make sure that you attain the conservation objectives that you have. And you agree with me that when we talk of management, you never have all the resources. And therefore, at any given point, you are dealing with 4 major constraints. And that includes issues of time management. You're looking at issues of the scope of the project you're implementing. You're looking at the issues of the cost aspect of that particular project, as well as the quality, because this is all needed for you to deliver a successful project. And my message is one, that for you to do proper conservation, then good science is never enough. You have to have the proper managerial skills for you to be able to attain that. And when we talk of conservation, this is way beyond issues of protecting nature. I know someone might think conservation is basically you getting out to the field and then you initiate probably a sustainable land management project. But in reality, you got a lot to deal with, including issues of the community engagement. That is usually very key, because the communities and the discussion today that we are having is the aspect of communally led initiatives. If the communities are not the point of focus, everything else, when you talk of sustainability, can never be guaranteed. Then you have to deal with issues of financial resources. You are always given a limited budget, and this is actually tied to specific deliverables that you need to meet at the end of every particular project. And therefore, this calls for, I would say, thinking outside the box on how you can be able to leverage, say, on the partnership that exists, because you can never do it on your own. There's a need for you to engage and make sure that you bring on board all the partners, all the actors within a specific landscape, for you to be able to successfully execute a certain project. And then you also have to take into consideration the risk that come with that. Everything about management must entail you understanding the risks that are involved. You have to know how you prioritize, which are the high risk, which are the medium risk, and which are the low risk that you're dealing with at any given point. And this will help you develop a risk mitigation strategy, so that you know, in the eventuality of something coming up, how do you deal with that? And making sure that at the end of it all, you are able to meet the specific objectives that you are set to attain. And the other most important thing, and this is something very key to everyone within the space of natural resource management, is how do you collect information? How do you store that data? And how do you transfer that information to the relevant groups? The dissemination aspect of it is key, so that when we talk of scaling up, this information is readily available, and you can always learn from what you've done, say, in a certain project, so that you minimize errors that might occur, and you also make sure that you communicate the project impact to the relevant groups that you're having. So my key takeaway is that every conservation project here must successfully manage all these multiple interconnected elements to make sure that you bring up a project that is ecologically fit, one that takes into account the issues of the social aspects, the technical, as well as the financial considerations in that particular project. Let me quickly take you through some of the management practices across the LWF programs. And when we talk of Laikipia Wildlife Forum, this is just a highlight of what we basically do. We are into forests and landscape restoration. And you find that in most cases here, through some initiatives that we are calling out, you have to think about what are the key components of any forest project that you are planning to execute. Currently, we know that the government of Kenya, through the presidential directive, we are into the 15 billion trees initiative. That is okay. And also Kenya committed to restoring a total of 5.1 million hectares by the year 2030. And therefore, if you are tasked with the responsibility of managing such a project, then you go to think about issues of planting materials, for instance. How do you establish mega tree nurseries within the community so that they can supply to this particular project? How are you going to carry out the aspect of species selection so that you maximize on the survival rate? And how are you going to organize your work so that you're able to collect enough data on the survival counter, and also making sure that at the end of it all, you are able to attain the targets that you've set. Then this basically tells you that you're not basically going into, say, tree growing, but there are other aspects that you need to factor in for you to attain success in that particular project. Then when we talk of the lands management, in Laikipia, we talk of communally owned lands. We have 13 registered community lands in Laikipia. And part of the major task that you have, if you are to execute any project, is for you to develop grazing plans, showing areas that are actively set aside for conservation, areas that support the wet grazing seasons, the one that support the dry grazing seasons. Basically, I'll tell you, we are moving towards having land use plans for every community land that we have, because the land use plan would be finally integrated into what we call the spatial planning, so that everyone knows what land use practice is actually set aside in a certain zone. So aspect of zonation becomes quite key. And all these things are made possible if you also focus on the aspect of community governance, because you have to build and sustain a very key, community-led governance system that will help you oversee and execute such mandates. And then when we talk of issues of water resource management, because this is also one of the thematic areas that we deal with, you find that you have to think holistically, look at the catchment in a more holistic manner, and understand that you are dealing with a resource that is shared across various counties. And therefore, every effort that you do, it has to be designed in a way that it addresses the whole system, right from what we call the upstream zones, the midstream zones, as well as the downstream zones, so that you are able to understand that the resource you are sharing is not really coming from, our taps, but rather coming from the catchment areas that need coordinated and joint efforts for you to attain such things. So you find that stakeholder engagement becomes quite key. And this is one of the key things that you need to really address and look at. Then we have issues of human-wildlife coexistence. You go to look at the rapid response. For instance, you have to look at the key partnership with other agencies, such as the Kenya Wildlife Service. And all these forms part of what I would call management practices across some of the programs that we learn as LWF. Allow me to quickly jump into a case study. And just as Johan mentioned, we are heavy on issues of invasive species management, because where I work, Opuntia slicta, to be precise, is a major nuisance. We've had cases of the pastoral communities being displaced. They end up moving their livestock from, spaces that were originally meant for grazing, and they drive these livestock all the way to the Mount Kenya area, which is a water tower in this particular zone. And therefore, we've had a lot of management practices around that. When we were starting this initiative, we were looking at the manual uprooting as a management strategy. But later on, we came to realize that the aspect of uprooting is quite cost intensive and requires a lot of resources for you to even manage 1 hectarage. So what we did, we came to realize that there is a need for us to think on the aspect of utilization, because as I mentioned, the manual uprooting became quite expensive. We tried the biological control through the coccinelle, but realized, yes, it works, but you find that the coccinelle is only effective during the dry seasons. During the wet seasons, you find that it tends to hibernate, and therefore you are not able to really match up the speed at which this particular Opuntia slicta is spreading. So what we thought is that why not think of utilizing this particular plant into animal feed? because the Opuntia as it is, it has a very high moisture content, and this will definitely reduce even the need for the animals within that particular dry area getting water from the scarce, like resources that we have. So our project goal, this one was actually implemented in conjunction with with FAO Kenya. We were looking at improving the livestock resilience during the drought season and using now the Opuntia slicter as an alternative source of forage. And our initial assumption at the project design was very simple. We are going to do the harvesting of the cactus because this is something we've already had experienced. We process the feed, and then definitely we now allow the livestock to make use of that particular resource. But what we came to realize is that successful implementation required far more than the technical knowledge. There was the aspect of community consent that was needed to be factored in. The aspect of livestock insurance, because you're introducing a totally new feed to the livestock there. You're also dealing with other uncertainties, including the aspect of the predators within the area. And we're also looking at the aspect of, water provision within that particular project, something that we're not factored in the very initial project design. Then we're also looking at how do you monitor to track and see that this particular Opuntia selector can actually be used and can actually sustain the livestock. How do you track, for instance, the weight? So we are looking at obtaining the weighing equipment for the livestock, something that we are not also budgeted for. And therefore, as we went on into the implementation, we realized that the funding approval alone at the very initial stage does not really mean that you are going to have a project that is implementation ready. And in this case, it taught us one major lesson, that there is a need for us to plan beyond the proposal. There are usually those costs which are hidden, and especially if you do it in a rush, there is a high likelihood that one might forget a few things, and this would actually hinder the successful execution of any project. And therefore, in our case, our initial budgeting basically included the feed processing, issues of labor, issues of transport, but we forgot to include other key costs that later on came to be factored in. And this involved getting a lot of community engagement, because initially we thought that it would be very easy for the community to adopt the project and get their buy-in. But later on we realized with the pastoral community setting, it takes some time for them to agree to the project. And we came to realize that out of only 4 planned community engagement, we had to have zone meetings with all the groups, and eventually we were talking of 14 community meetings. So the additional 10 were actually not factored in the budget. And this tells you the need to have a proper analysis of any project before you introduce it to the community. Then the aspect of livestock insurance. We never thought that this would be important. We thought that we are just basically introducing a new feed and the livestock would just get comfortable with it. But later on, we realized there was a risk involved. So what do? We again had to get back to the donor, request for an amendment of what we call the letter of agreement, and see whether we could be able to request for some additional cost, so that before we start the project, aspect of livestock insurance was, a key consideration to avoid conflict with the community, and also to make sure that in case there is an eventuality, we have these factored in. So all these are factors that we had not looked at initially, but it became quite important for us to have them. And in the interest of time, these are just some pictorial presentations of the work we did. We were able to harvest the cactus. Then the main challenge becomes the small spines. So we were able to have, as a technology of how we could be able to eliminate them. And then we were able to crush them into a slurry form. Then through collaboration with the University of Florida and a group from Calo, we were able to produce 3 feed formulations. One, the slurry we were looking at also the, the dialect feeding from these particular cactus. And the other one, we basically just chopped it into smaller pieces and mixed it with some sawdust for the purposes of dry matter content. So this tells you the need to have like proper engagement before you kickstart any initiative at the community level. So what would be the management success to us, and this is from what we came to see, is that there is a need to have very strong stakeholder engagement, issues of effective risk management. As I mentioned to you, we had to take an insurance cover for the livestock, issues of having a very realistic budget, and also being adaptive in terms of the planning. Yes, you may have a very clear plan in the beginning, but things happen and there is need to accommodate all the issues that might come at that particular point. So this is basically what we came to realize from that. But just to summarize, and just in the interest of time again, these are the core management functions we normally find in any conservation project. The aspect of you setting very clear objectives from the word go, the aspect of timelines being adhered to, and the aspect of effective resource allocation. Then we talk of organizing. You have to have a team and also having the system thinking in terms of the operation. Don't just look at one aspect, try to have a holistic analysis of what is needed across the entire project. Then the aspect of leading is key, because you can imagine a scenario whereby you're implementing a project and then you're having a very high staff turnover. It really affects everything and can actually hinder the successful execution of any particular project. So there's a need for you to really motivate the staff that you are working with and making sure that they also understand in full what is expected of them at the project execution phase. Then the aspect of controlling. This basically, we talk of the aspect of monitoring the progress. You see whether you're on track, looking at the aspect of risk management, as well as adaptive management in the project that you do. So regarding the challenges and the skills for the conservation managers, these are some things that we experience on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes related to weather, this becomes a problem. We work in Laikipia whereby sometimes you are not able to access the project sites. So how do you account for the lost time if you are to execute any project and the donor requires you to deliver as per the timelines? So you have to account for all this. In case of community conflict arising, how do you handle that? How do you look at the aspect of funding gaps? You've signed an agreement, but the amount is not sufficient for you to successfully deliver the project. Then how do you also look at the aspect of staff turnover? I just spoke about that. And then the aspect of managing the data that is required at any given point. So these are basically what you require, and these are the essential skills. I don't have to go through it in details. But as I conclude, is that management normally acts as the bridge between the conservation ideas that you have and realizing impact that can be sustained at the community level. And without it, you find that even the very best projects that you may have can actually fail. But when you have proper management, then conservation becomes sustainable, it becomes scalable, and also becomes transformative at the community level. So the goal is just to plan carefully, make sure you have a proper community engagement, make sure you manage the risk, make sure that you use the available information before you even kickstart the project, store the information that you have, and use it to continuously improve in your project management. So as I conclude, I just want to say that conservation is basically not just about protecting the wildlife, but here you are talking of managing people, you are managing resources, you are managing risk, as well as change that you want to see at the end of it all. So that was my time. I really appreciate for the opportunity. If you go to Laikipia Wildlife Forum, you'll get to see and get to learn more from our end. And therefore, Johan, without much ado, I'll stop it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. the sign of a man who knows how to manage is somebody who can stick to time. That was perfect. Thank you, Peter. That was such a brilliant, fast tour through the whole management concept, deeply rooted in the conservancy model of Kenya. Peter, there was a little box in your presentation that said, funding approval does not mean the project is implementation ready. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, thank you so much. And by that I meant you find that many times you find that those of us who are in the NGO world, you find that in most cases you prioritize fundraising and securing funds for you to go out and execute a project. But you find that there is a need for you, before you even have that idea in lighting, can you go out to the community, get to see whether the ideas you are presenting to them is something viable and something that they will be willing to support. So you might find a scenario whereby you've already secured funding, yes, but taking that particular project to the community, it's actually rejected. And I can give you an example, maybe outside the invasive topic that we are dealing here today. There's a project that was to be supported by a group regarding the issues of a common intake. A common intake, for those who might know, is basically a way where the community comes together and they're able to abstract water directly from a water body. So the idea was to combine the different groups into a single abstraction point. And one group presented a very good idea to a donor. I don't want to mention the name. They got the funding for that particular project. But when they took it to the community, it became a problem for them to carry on with the execution, meaning that they had skipped the aspect of community engagement and prioritized issues of fundraising without knowing that this might backfire at some point. So it's always good to get to know whether the community and whether the issues you are presenting, where are they coming from? Do we have the community approving that even prior before you start any project? So that is the reason why I was saying that you might have funding, yes, but that doesn't really mean that that project is set for implementation.
Thank you, Peter. It's definitely a mistake to skip any step. There's always the temptation to go over certain steps because we all favor, due to our strengths and weaknesses, certain steps, but don't do it. Peter, thank you very much. There's a question from Stewart. Given that domestic livestock are key in the distribution of invasive plant species, what forms of planning best mitigates their impact, and how do you get herders to adopt this planning? That's a very practical question.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And that is actually a very, really practical field question. And for us, that is why I mentioned the aspect of grazing management plans. At any given point, you need to have a grazing management plan so that you know in this particular zone, the livestock are allowed. In this other zone, the livestock are not allowed. But having a grazing management plan alone doesn't guarantee that these livestock will not enter into those particular areas. And that is why for us, we emphasize a lot on the aspect of social fencing, because you may not have resources to put up probably a physical fence to deter the livestock, but the community themselves, once they understand and once they are engaged, we bank on them to exercise what we call the social fencing so that they're able to help you mitigate on those particular risks.
Johan, if I can just come into what Peter said there, your domestic livestock is one thing. You've also got wild animals in a conservation area. We have a lot of problems with baboons spreading both prosopis and the puntia seeds. So it's a management of both domestic and wildlife that becomes a major issue.
Okay, there's an additional aspect there. There's a nice challenge added there. Peter, you want to comment on that one? I can imagine that baboons could be a problem there.
Yeah, very true. I totally agree with Graham because you find, especially for Laikipia, we host 22% of the total elephant population in Kenya, and elephants are a major, I would say, seed dispersing agents. especially for puntia. And baboons as well, they really contribute a lot to the dispersal and to the spread of this particular planter. And therefore, for us, mainly is focusing on the aspect of, working basically with KWS, for instance, and trying to have areas where the livestock the wild animals to some extent are regulated access, especially in the community zones. But that has been a major problem to this particular landscape, because we've not really had, I would say, like a very clear way of addressing that to date, because then the community lands that we work in, they are also registered now as conservancies. And therefore, there's a high presence of this particular wildlife that supports in the dispersal of those particular seed. So this is something that we would be willing to hear, maybe what has been happening in other areas and what can be done to probably try to reduce the spread by these wild animals.